Hello everyone, how's it going? I know this Final Fantasy 16 review is going to be a little more just personal, me in the camera and expressing how I feel about the game because I was denied monetization again, stating that my channel reuses content and that I don't, for my reapplication, I didn't provide enough information to showcase my video. I'm just like defeated at this point, so I still want to do a review because I completed the game. I'm playing on Final Fantasy difficulty right now, but I want to do Square Enix justice for this review, and I know I'm not going to put like massive gameplay footage on it, and I'm just going to speak to you about it and speak from the script I wrote, but I want to still provide some context about my experience with the game. So Final Fantasy 16 is out. Now, is this a good Final Fantasy to start with? I really think that is an obtuse way of looking at Final Fantasy in general. Just because the games are numbered doesn't mean that you can't start with any of the mainline entries, even some of the subline entries, and not have an ideal experience. Yeah, certain Final Fantasy games are continuations, such as X2, 13.2, and Lightning Returns, but in terms of a starting point, I would say that's up to you as what type of gamer you are. If you're a turn-based fan of those types of games, I would say Final Fantasy X is actually the best one to start with. If you want more of an active combat situation while at the same time keeping the turn-based styles, I would say go for Final Fantasy 13 or Lightning Returns to be specific. But with this one, it's definitely Final Fantasy. It's definitely Devil May Cry. It's a lukewarm version of Devil May Cry, the gameplay system. So I would say if you want that full active combat experience with the same, I guess, flair of Devil May Cry, yeah, this is definitely an entry level point. Final Fantasy 15 kind of isn't there with the fluidity of its combat system, but when it comes to the narrative, I would say Final Fantasy 15 is still better with its camaraderie. But let's get into the narrative. First off, let's talk about the story. So the story stars Clive Rosfield. The primary goal of the story is for him to take revenge for the death of his brother. He wants revenge for what happened to him, and that is your primary goal until later on in the Final Fantasy series. Now, if you know anything about Final Fantasy, you know that the first storyline that you're given is usually just a jumping off point for what is going to become the real life story. You know, the idea of kill mud crabs, then kill God philosophy, and it's definitely still here. By the two-thirds waypoint, you will have an idea of what the main narrative is, but I won't get into that. That's primarily the focus right now. Take revenge for your brother's death. Now, how is Clive Rosfield as the protagonist of Final Fantasy 16? He does an ideal job. He is steadfast. He is a set of ideals. He believes in the righteousness of one's action, but at the same time, he also understands that certain actions are necessary to meet the ends of your goal. For example, he is what is known as a bearer. Bearers are people capable of magical abilities, but in this world, they're seen as slaves and indentured servants. Even though they have all this power, they're told to be the slaves of everyone around them. And the primary reason they don't usurp the people who don't have powers, like in, say, Avatar The Last Airbender, is explained later on in the game. But nevertheless, they are marked with this type of tattoo across their face, which cannot be removed unless it's surgically removed. The first thing a lot of people are going to ask, why don't they just remove those tattoos? It's embedded into their skin to the point that it is literally life and death if they want to remove that thing. So once you're marked for life, essentially. But magic does play a huge role within this game. It's used as a deterrent for a lot of the civilizations that are going to war. Now, you are in the middle of a giant war between warring factions, and the biggest deterrent that you have are these things called dominates. Dominates basically house icons, which are the summonings of this world. Only one person can have this icon, and one person can be a dominant. And because of that, they're either subjugated or they're given the most praise you can possibly imagine, so they're loyal to whatever faction they're part of. But they can summon these icons, and they serve as nuclear weapons. The game really showcases how powerful these summonings are, to the point that they are at most a deterrent towards other civilizations, saying that this person has an icon and we can't make sure they summon them because they cause so much havoc and destruction, even their own people can suffer because of these transformations. But Clive is steadfast in how he wants to avenge his brother. Like later on in the game, he does have an ideology that he is willing to step up for people who are less fortunate, for example, the bearers, but he also understands that he has to take certain measurements in order to ensure and achieve his goals. He's very focused on what he has to do, while at the same time, he's more than willing to stand up for people who are less fortunate, but it's kind of a give or take. He understands what's necessary, but at the same time, he's smart about how he takes on the objective. I would say he's more or less a more sociable version of Squall. He's definitely a charismatic person. When he speaks, people listen. People follow him. He's a natural born leader. He's extremely strong willed, and he's willing to back that up. He's a very seasoned warrior, and he's willing to use whatever means he has to in order to accomplish his goal. Now, I don't want to get too much into the story because this is a very lengthy game. It took me about 25 hours to complete it on my first playthrough because I was doing all the side content, and we'll get more into that. But the game does have a sense of growth where you start to see Clive and his companions grow together, and you definitely have that sense of camaraderie. I don't think it's that strong as Final Fantasy 15 because in that game it was more like a road trip. You were with your allies, and even though they separated during specific times, they still had that companion bond that goes beyond what Final Fantasy 16 provides, mainly because they don't have that sense of combat camaraderie. It's more of a social camaraderie. Like the story is the reason that you develop bonds with the characters, as opposed to the other Final Fantasy games where it was a mix of combat and dialogue. But for this game, the combat, they do have allies, but they serve more as supplements rather than integral parts of the combat system. Mostly it's just Clive going straight first and dealing the most damage towards whatever you're facing. But I would say that a lot of people said the narrative falls off at the end. And I kind of agree with that, but I also disagree. I think the ending of the game is solid. Like, it gives you a good ending and of how the world continues after all the calamity has passed. I will say that there are some parts of the story that are a bit off. Like, I had to actually read up and understand what was fully going on because the main villain of the story, first off, I loved it. The design of the main villain is extraordinary. It seems like they picked someone who was a survival horror expertise to help design this thing. Once you see it, it is terrifying. Like, the thing looks like inhumane in so many ways, but it's supposed to be in a lot of ways. But at the same time, the main antagonist of this game, I love the design. It is a 10 out of 10 design. It is one of the most terrifying things you can imagine from a Final Fantasy game. And we've had some really good villains in the past, but I don't think they've ever come to the same degree of terrifying. They were definitely imposing, like Sephiroth, Kefka, Chaos. But in this game, this thing is definitely scary. So if I were to give the story a score, I would give it a 7 out of 10. I think the story is definitely above average. It's definitely not out there. But the main issue that I have with the narrative is that they have these very long cutscenes. Like, the cutscenes can stretch on, like, into the same degree of Metal Gear Solid. But whereas in Metal Gear Solid, they have a lot of, like, goofy, intense, highly entertaining action, a large portion of the story is told through these very long cutscenes where they're just talking to one another. They're definitely well designed. The choreography in this game is extraordinary, and it really shows how Square Enix is a master at this stuff. After all, they do have a history of making movies, so they do know what they're doing here. But when it comes to outside those cinematics, it's very bare bones. You can see where the budget went. It went to these high octane, incredible cinematics that are just absolutely fantastic, from people talking and engaging to the icon battles. It is a spectacle. But when you get to the side missions, it's literally just two people talking to one another. In fact, some of the side missions, I would say if you would have put the action sequences of the side missions side by side, you would only get about 10% that's action and gameplay focus, and the other 90% is literally them just talking back and forth. And even though I like the narrative and these side missions do give more weight to the narrative, it can become so tedious and boring that you'll literally just shut off. You'll be like, oh my god, like when is the talking going to end? One side mission, which was 20 minutes long, a lot of these side missions range between 5 to 25 minutes. One of the missions was 19 minutes of talking, 2 minutes of action. So unless you have a really good sense of attention, you're going to tune out in a lot of these dialogue options. Again, the main story dialogue options are engaging and fun to watch, but the side mission dialogue, be prepared to have your attention span tested with these things. They go on for a long time, and it's literally just basic character models doing this, talking. Like, it's almost like I was hoping for the power pose from Assassin's Creed Odyssey to appear. That's how bad some of these side content missions are, and you need to do them, because if you don't do them, I've heard from my walkthroughs that people have been locked out of side content because they didn't do the previous side content that was available in certain parts of the narrative. There are junctions within the main story where they open up new side content, and if you don't do them, I did all the side content, so I'm not really sure whether to test this or not, and I don't want to test it because a lot of these side contents come during very paramount and difficult parts within the narrative, so I don't want to, so I'm going to give those people the benefit of the doubt. But if it is true, be prepared to be locked out of some of the most powerful and profound side missions within the game, because some of the gear that you'll get, I'll get more into that, is locked behind these side missions, and you're going to have to do them. For example, the Blacksmith Blues. If you don't do that side mission, you are not getting the most powerful gear in the game, and you're basically wasting your time with all the hunts that you're going to have to do, which I'll get into later. I know I'm saying that a lot, but I'm trying to keep this compartmentalized so everything is within realm of reasoning when it comes to the story. So yeah, the story is okay. It's not the best Final Fantasy story. I still think Final Fantasy 9 and 10 have the best story. And this one is definitely more of a Game of Thrones-esque story. So there's a lot of like power plays and a lot of leaders that you have to keep track of. And there are certain parts of the story literally dedicated to just telling you what just happened. So, I mean, the game does have this really good feature, and I wish more games do this, where you can literally just open up a prompt and it'll tell you all the relevant information of what just happened in that specific story, and you later on gain access to a character named Vivienne, who basically just tells you everything that's been happening up to the point that you're at. So if you ever need a refresher, that option is there. Great job on that, Square Enix. Fantastic job on that. I know there are people who come back to games, and this is something that is a very welcome addition for people who, come back to it after a month or a week after that. All right, let's talk about gameplay. Now, the gameplay centers around Clive. You do gain allies throughout the story, but for the most part, Clive is the main focus here. It plays more or less like, I would say, Final Fantasy 15's guest characters. They come in, but they're not really there for the purpose of helping you there. Like, they're more or less just meat shields or just cosmetic purposes. Characters such as Jill, Joshua, and other characters you'll encounter will just be there. They do some really flashy attacks, no doubt about it, like some really cool, but they're just there for just entertainment purposes. Clive is the main focus of dealing the heavy damage. Now, Clive has two basic attacks. He has a basic melee attack, and he has a long-range magic attack. Now, none of this really matters in terms of elemental damage. For the most part, you can use fire against fire, ice against ice, and you gain more powers as you go through the game in the form of icons. The icons will give you access to 5 new abilities, 2 of which you get off the start, and the other 2 are accessed by using your experience points. And at any time, if you want to retool your spec, you can do it at any time. You can reset the points and get the same amount of experience that you spent on the icon's ability, so you are never barred from customization. You can reset everything and then choose what you want from the pool that you have access to. There aren't any full summons. These are limited to very specific fights, icon battles, so you can't summon anyone, but you do get a limit break where Clive can overcharge his attacks. Again, it's just for show for the elemental damage. For the most part, elements don't matter. Just you would use whatever attack that you feel that is the best option for you. So you have access to 2 abilities and 3 icons that you can swap between. And each icon, you can use their ability, which is on a timer that is shown on a little circle. The primary focus is to dodge and counterattack. If you have access to certain accessories, you can do much more profound dodges, but you have 1 weapon, which is always a sword, and 2 armor bracelets, which is a van brace and an arm and a belt. Basically, it just serves as cosmetic boost for the most part. You don't really need to use them, but just choose the most powerful option, and that's all you have to know. There is no mixing and customization. Just choose the most powerful option. It works. For the accessories, you got 3 accessories that you can choose from. These are where you really need to decide what you want. You can increase certain icon abilities, you can reduce the cooldown for them, and there is a difficulty option. Now, the first difficulty option is story focus, where enemies are so easy and you just want to focus on the story. The other option are accessories, which increase invasion, which allow you to auto attack. I'm sure a lot of us have seen that game journalist's video of it. That's basically what it is. It's an easy mode upon an easy mode. And you only gain access to the true hard mode, Final Fantasy difficulty, after completing the game. There is a new game plus, but the game caps the level at 50, and you only gain access to the other 50 levels, so it's 100 at Final Fantasy difficulty when you access Final Fantasy difficulty. But if you don't want that, you can still go through New Game Plus with all your gear and everything intact, which is wonderful. I love the fact that there's New Game Plus in this game. And Final Fantasy difficulty is definitely a test. They remix enemies, have exclusive content, so they definitely encourage you to play through Final Fantasy difficulty to get the full experience. There are some things in this game that will truly test your mettle, and overall the combat is really richly rewarding. It's a toned down version of Devil May Cry 5. It's very active, very it's fully immersive in the sense of it's just plain fun. Like, the combat is the paramount feature you're going to play this game for. If it wasn't for the combat, this game would have fallen apart dramatically, and it's just so much fun. Now, dodging is an option there, but you also have parrying. You have 2 options for parrying. The first one is the one you get off the bat. It's extremely difficult but rewarding to execute. You have to hit the enemy exactly at the same time that the enemy executes their attack. It's extremely difficult to pull off, but thank God they have another option for parrying. This is the Titan ability, where you can hold down guard and guarded ability, or you can parry him, and that's much more efficient, but you only get that through a third of the game, so you have to kind of master the original parrying. But the game has such a terrific balance between dodging and parrying that it's like the Surge 2. I think the Surge 2 is another optimal reason for example of this, where even if you don't understand the parrying system, you can dodge and it will have just as much of an effect. You don't need to master the parrying system. You can use the dodging system to similar degree. Definitely parrying is much more efficient because it slows down the opponent and cancels out their attack, as opposed to dodging where you just don't take any damage. So definitely parrying is encouraged, but not necessary. You can just dodge, and the dodging is pretty efficient and very generous in my opinion. Not to the point that you can exploit it, but to the point that you don't need pinpoint accuracy to dodge. It's definitely to the point that it's balanced efficiently, so you don't need to have exact movement. But if you are that type of person who needs exact movement, the parrying option is there for you. So the combat is a lot of fun, and I say the combat is necessary because you're going to fight a lot of the same enemies over and over again, and it's going to become very apparent towards 2/3 of the game. Yes, you do have hunts. Hunts are big contracts where you take down very powerful enemies, but even then, most of them are recycled enemies. Some of them are exclusive, but most of them are recycled, more powerful variants of existing enemies, and you're going to fight the same enemies over and over. Now, thank God, grinding isn't necessary. It is there, but you are given such little experience that grinding is not really needed. You gain enough experience through the story progression and side content that you never really need that grind. By the end of the game, I completed all the story content and did all the hunts, and I was near to level 50, so I never needed to grind. The game is made in a way where grinding is actually discouraged because you don't really need to, seeing that the items you need in order to craft the most powerful items you get from the hunts and the bosses, and the experience you get from just defeating normal enemies is just so unnecessary that it becomes just a chore to do it. Unless you like the combat system like I do. I love the combat system, so I actively sought out fights. Now, the game isn't true open world. It's actually compartmentalized. Like, you just have different sections of the world and you just pick an area and you go to it. It's not like Final Fantasy 15, which is a bit of annoyance because you don't get a ship, unfortunately. So you just go from one area to the next. You do get a chocobo, which is a nice addition, but the speed is still not that fast. For some reason, there's no automatic sprint option. I'm not sure about that, why there is no automatic sprint option. Like, you have to wait until your character just sprints on his own, which I don't get. Why isn't there a sprint option like in Final Fantasy VII Remake? And this can be very annoying to trigger. Not really sure why, but it is there. But the Chocobo is there, and you get that towards a third of the game, and it's a side mission. So if you miss out on that, you're kind of out of luck. So you have to do that side mission in order to get it. I already showed how to do it in one of my walkthrough guides. But yeah, the open world is beautiful. Like, the game is extraordinarily beautiful. You definitely feel a sense of, like, these are lived in towns and settlements. There isn't much to do. Like, there are some treasure chests here and there, but for the most part, you don't really need to buy stuff from vendors. You do buy potions and stuff like that, and money is finite, but stuff is so inexpensive that you will never run out of money. At least I never run out of money. The only time you'll run out of money if you try and buy like these optional musical discs for your main hub area. But even then, I was able to buy all of them by the end of the game, so they're there. There's no trophy associated to them, so it's just a matter of just you want the 100% the game, which I'm trying to do. But yeah, so you'll never run out of gil. Towns really don't serve any purpose other than cosmetic. I mean, they definitely put their effort into it. You see people speaking about relevant events that are currently happening, the fear that they're starting to feel as you continue through the game as more calamity happens. So it definitely gives you a sense of immersion that these are real people, real towns, and everything. But the side content doesn't really complement that well enough for you to be fully immersed. Like I stated, the side content is really just boring dialogue trees that are only there for people who have really strong attention spans. And the combat there is just more of the same thing. Now, the more powerful enemies you'll encounter have what is called a stagger meter. People who've played Final Fantasy 13 will be very familiar with this. Basically, you do next to no damage against mini-bosses. The primary focus is to deplete their stamina meter or their stagger meter. Once it's depleted, you can do major damage, and that's when you start to do the major damage. You use your limit breaks, you lose your more powerful icon abilities, and that's the primary focus. Once it's exhausted, the stamina regens for the enemy, then they show you how much damage you've done to the boss, so a mini boss, and that's always the primary focus, just to deplete the stamina meter. Everything else is just happenstance. So you always play defensively until you attack. Thank God the stamina meter doesn't recharge unless the full thing is depleted, so you could just keep going forward and just keep attacking. Definitely more focused on defense than offense here, but nevertheless, that is the focus there. As for the true boss fights from the main storyline, they are incredible. They are giant cinematic affairs that are next to none. From the start to the game to the end, it is absolutely breathtaking with these cinematic affairs. They even brought back the cinematic attacks from Final Fantasy 13 2, where you tap the button for these huge cinematic attacks. It's just quick time events, but they look cool, so I give them a pass on that. Nevertheless, these boss fights are amazing, and I absolutely love it. And if you're having trouble with the boss fights, again, there are accessories to help you with these fights. You can choose special items that increase your strength, even revive you right there if you happen to lose. So there are easy options provided to the player if they're having difficulties with it. But the boss fights, I just don't want to explain them in great detail and who they are, but they just get better and better until the finale of the game. The only problem I would say with the boss fights is that sometimes you can feel like it's sensory overload. Like, there's so many things happening on screen that you can sometimes feel that the boss fights that you don't know what's going on. Like one of my viewers, Blue, actually addressed this. She was like, I don't know what the hell is going on the final boss fight. She's looking at it and it was just like a giant cosmic thing that was happening. And I think that people who have like sight issues may have problems with it because, again, it can be incredibly overwhelming unless you're entirely focused on what's happening. But overall, the gameplay is definitely one of the most alluring parts of the entire game. The sense of discovery may be there for the sense of the hunts, where you go into some areas that are not provided to you in the mainline missions, but it doesn't have the same sense of discovery that Final Fantasy 12 or Final Fantasy 15 had, where you saw these big doors or optional areas. It just doesn't have that, and it's kind of disappointing that it doesn't. Even Final Fantasy 10 had that, where you could input secret codes and get into like the Omega runes and stuff like that. I haven't discovered any of that, and I've seen walkthroughs where people haven't discovered this, so there's kind of a lackluster sense of discovery in the gameplay. I would say download the demo, and if you are not in love with the combat, that will be the smoking gun here. If you do not like the combat from that demo, you're not going to like the rest of the game. The combat is so amazingly well done. That's really what's holding this game together. As a longtime Final Fantasy fan, the optional content is just not there. It is boring, it is tedious, and the only reason I did it was because I wanted that powerful gear, and I'm a completionist. If you're not any of those things, you're going to be instantly turned off by a lot of this side content to the point you're probably going to skip it, or watch one of my walkthroughs in order to see what you missed out on, because that's what a lot of people are watching my walkthroughs for. They're like, I couldn't watch this whole thing when I played it, so I was like, okay, it's same thing with Assassin's Creed Valhalla with my walkthroughs with that. But yeah, alright, so let's get to another big thing about Final Fantasy games, the music. How is it? The music is terrific. No complaints, absolutely amazing. It's not the best, and I know I'm saying that. Everyone has their own favorites. I'm sure a lot of people will count this as their favorite soundtrack. I still think that Final Fantasy X and 9 have the best soundtrack of any Final Fantasy game, but this one is definitely up there. I would say it's probably, it's great. Like, it's definitely immersive, it's definitely strong-willed, it definitely shows a passion that mixes together nostalgia and modern taste. It's brilliant. I love it. Absolutely incredible. It definitely complements well with the characters, the choreography, the cutscenes. Absolutely amazing. I love Jill's soundtrack. It's so amazing. I love Jill, but she's basically Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, which I have no issue with. I love Jill. I love all the characters in this game. Even if they're just cosmetically purposed for combat, they're still, I love having them on my side. Toggle, he's amazing. He's basically the only ally that you'll have that is actually an ally, because even though he does next to none damage, he does heal you, and he does serve as emotional support. Let's face it, like, Torgal is the best. He's there. You love having him there. And every time I was separated from him, I was like, no, I want him back. I want my dog friend back. So, yeah. Overall, the gameplay is amazing. I went into the sound design. The sound design is terrific. 10 out of 10, no questions. It is perfect. Like, I had no issue with the sound design. Now, let's talk about technical stability. Now, I know a lot of people are talking about how this was shutting down their PlayStation 5s and major issues like that. I believe them 100%. When you play this game, you can see that it's taken a toll on the PlayStation 5. And even though I didn't have any shutdowns or problems, I did definitely see frame rate hiccups, especially during the more lavish scenes. Like, there would definitely be slowdowns and tearing, but nothing too dramatic. It's actually pretty shocking that this game never crashed on me. Like, I was just like, wow, like, amazing. Like, I mean, it's a mainline Final Fantasy game. Square Enix is not going to, like, have another Final Fantasy 14 original on their hands. They're going to go completely all out with this, with the technical stability. So I can see that why people are saying their games are crashing and problems exist. But for the most part, it ran smoothly. I liked it in the sense that the only major issues were things that I can bypass. I'm sure it's going to be fixed later on, but this is such a massively demanding game that I really can't, excuse. Like, I can't be too harsh on them with that. So there are problems here and there, but for the most part, they're non-existent. So overall, if I were to give Final Fantasy 16 a score, I would give it the highest 8 out of 10 I can. It's definitely not the best Final Fantasy game out there. It's definitely extraordinary. It's fun. It's engaging. I loved my time with it, and I can't wait to go back for Final Fantasy difficulty, which I'm playing on. But it's definitely not the best. I think it's just new game hype and the amount of spectacle that's given it out there. I love Square Enix. They've been killing it this year with Octopath Traveler 2. I even liked Forspoken. I know a lot of people didn't. I loved it. But overall, I think that the game is brilliant and definitely worth it. This is definitely a system seller. If you have a PlayStation 5 and you love action RPGs, this is something you need to play. It is so much fun. But again, buy this for the combat. Don't really buy it for the story. Even though I like the story, I can see the many holes that are in it. This is coming from a longtime Final Fantasy fan, so maybe that's why I loved it so much. But regardless, highest 8 out of 10 I can give it. And yeah, so that's it from me. Tell me what you think about it. I know this video was pretty tone deaf with how I was going to do this mass spectacle with huge walkthroughs and all this stuff. But, you know, this is what YouTube wants. They don't want me to use footage. They want me to just commentate. So take that for what it is. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Goodbye.